I grew up Catholic, part of a Catholic community. My mum is a person of faith. My dad is not. So yeah, was raised with faith in the Catholic Church. And yeah, I loved the Catholic Church. I loved going to Mass. And the way that filtered out into our lives. When I was 12, I got involved in a Pentecostal church. So a bit of a different,
pretty different
direction. Yeah. There are definitely some crossovers though.
Interesting.
Which I don't know if you want to go into that or not, because
that sounds interesting.
Tangential, but both of them definitely have a strong sense of a spiritual reality and of mysticism, a sense of spiritual experience. I think that is not as strong in some Protestant traditions, like I think in the Uniting Church. That's my experience anyway, those traditions. So I was in that Pentecostal church for 6 years, and then at the end of that, I think it was towards the end of that time that I started to have a sense of curiosity about vocational ministry. So I would have been like at the end of high school. Was really involved in music and worship leading. And I'd been told that people could see me being like a worship pastor. So in that Pentecostal church, there wasn't ordination, and so ministry was probably shared with a larger team. And so I guess maybe imagine that I might go into something like that. Then at the end of that, I was 18 around this time, I left the Pentecostal church, and had a bit of a faith shift. Was coming to terms with some of the theology in that tradition. Also coming to terms with my own queerness and how that fit within that church culture. And so I was looking for something different. I was also moving to Sydney from. I grew up at Lake Macquarie or Bobblecall country, so that also was an opportunity to do some exploring. And then when I moved to Sydney, I joined the Uniting Church. That things really changed for me. I think I really found a sense of home within the Uniting Church. Especially I think in the conviction about social justice that is present in a lot of our communities. The fact that I found queer affirming community as well here made it a sense of home for me. So that's a bit about my faith journey. Were we moving into ordination as well? I can't remember
not just yet. I want to park up here for a bit. And I'd love to. You mentioned that in both those early years in like the Catholic tradition, and then also in the Pentecostal tradition, there's much more of a focus on like mysticism and the spiritual experience of things like the Holy Spirit. Was that? I mean, I can only imagine that was very formative for you, and like you say, a very different church like even baked into things like liturgy. We don't focus on that stuff nearly as much in places like the Uniting Church. Do you still feel I don't know, was that a formative thing for you, and how does that maybe do you still hang on to some of those leanings towards the spiritual and the mystic in your faith, or has that sort of become more of a thing of the past for you?
It was massively formational. I think, and in those years in the Pentecostal church, that invitation to really dive into that, I mean, that is so much of what characterizes charismatic spirituality. It's massively formational. And I think it's been probably only in the last year that I think I've understood how formational that has been in my spirituality and my sense of faith. One of the interesting things that happens at theological when you're going through formation, just to jump ahead, is as you're having these conversations about what church should look like in inverted commas that the listeners can't see, you realize a lot of the assumptions that you have and the things that have formed you. And I think that I realized for me, the sense of experience of the Spirit yeah, it's I'm even struggling to put words around it. Yeah, it's a huge part of my spirituality. Yeah, in terms of like what that means, I think, yeah, did a lot of soul searching after leaving Pentecostal church about how to integrate that. It's funny when you have a tradition and a way of embodying your faith and you're not in a community who does that. I'm sure a lot of people might relate to that. It's hard to figure out how you keep that integrated into your faith. Yeah, and I think recently have maybe been more comfortable with returning to some of those practices, worshipping musically in that tradition and praying in a more Pentecostal way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny how almost culture dictates a lot of that stuff as much as theology and liturgy, because it doesn't matter how comfortable you might be as an individual doing any number of different spiritual practices. You find yourself in a church building full of who knows how many other people doing the complete opposite. It that does shape how you worship and how you practice your spirituality. Like you really, really are shaped by the culture of the people around you and how they worship, as well as your own personal experiences and conviction. And I've certainly, I don't know, like the flip side of that might even be like, I remember going to a couple of conferences when I was younger. And I've grown up going to uniting churches and I would often find myself in experiences at conferences or gatherings in other denominations where you're suddenly the only person in the room that finds things a bit odd.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, none of these people think this is weird. And that's awesome. But like, how do you then enter into that space in a way that's authentic when it's a bit foreign to you? Not in any, sometimes in a theological sense, but often just more in a cultural sense. Like this is normal and this is how people worship. So how do I try and enter into that? It's totally a tricky thing to wrestle with, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're so used to worshipping in our tradition that sometimes it doesn't. Well, it doesn't. Often it doesn't feel like worship when you step into someone else's tradition, because it's worship is such an embodied thing. Yeah. I think I definitely felt that when I, in some ways, I mean, I was lucky that I grew up in liturgical church, so I think that there was a seed in me as well. But definitely there were like coming into the Uniting Church, especially during worship, like music, when we're singing, and nobody's moving their body. And I'm like, what is, like, if when I'm singing, I have to move or it doesn't feel like I'm worshipping. So it is amazing how much our experience of worship is a cultural thing. Yeah. I think as well, even what we talk about, like, that we won't, the way we talk about our spirituality and the things that we will speak about. I'm realizing now, like even speaking to you, like the experiences that I'm just like filtering out, because like I'm assuming like if I was speaking to someone who like was from a charismatic, because we know each other through like uniting church
stuff.
Yeah. Just like experiences like when I said like praying in a Pentecostal way, I mean praying in tongues, but that almost feels like a taboo, like to talk about that in uniting church circles. Or like a really significant experience in Pentecostalism is baptism in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And that for me was like incredibly formational, and I think still now that experience feels like it's formed my faith and the way that I feel a sense of the Holy Spirit. God's presence with me as like almost a tangible presence. But yeah, it's funny, the things that we will talk about. And so it can be hard coming into another tradition and your whole language for faith as well now doesn't have any resonance or any currency. There's a lot to rebuild, I think, when you have a culture, a faith shift and a part of a new community.
It's interesting. Like Rev Ness is similar in that she comes from it would be interesting to talk to her about this actually, also comes from a Pentecostal background and has very formational experiences with tongues, but also like you say, baptism in the Spirit was a big thing, and going through formation, being told like, hey, like, you know, we don't do that stuff in the Uniting Church, like basically kind of back in your box a little bit.
Yeah,
like
I have never mentioned this at like college, like information. It's like I'm getting like sweaty talking about it now. I'm like, am I allowed to talk about this? Of course. Yeah,
of
but that's
course,
interesting that was her experience.
Yeah.